The title of my presentation is The Big Aha, and it's all about how to future-proof Kentucky. And I'm going to cut right to the chase and tell you the big aha. It's what I want you to take away from this presentation. And what the big aha is, it's an acronym, and it's how I want you to think about the future. And what it stands for is awareness, humility, and action. I'm going to walk you through each one of these three principles in my presentation. But before I do that, I know one of the most common questions I always get is, well, what do you do, Jack? What does a futurist do? And that's a great question, but rather than tell you what I do, I want to show you what I do. And I know that some of you have already seen this video, but that's okay. I'm going to show it to you again anyways. What I want you to do is I want you to count the number of times the people in the white shirt pass the ball. Whoever gets the correct answer, get a signed copy of my latest book. So does everyone understand what I'm asking? Okay, count the number of times people in the white shirt pass the ball. Here we go. Okay, that's it. How many people counted 15? Could I see a show of hands? Okay, so some of you. What about 16? More of you? 17? Okay, everyone who said 16, please stand up. Remain standing. 16 is, in fact, the correct answer. Now, unfortunately, I don't have books for all of you, but stay standing. I have a tie-breaking question, but now only the people who counted 16 can participate. But whomever I see raise their hand first with the correct answer to this follow-on question will get the book. So of the people standing, who could identify all three changes in that video? There were three quite distinct changes. What about two? Who saw two? Who saw the most obvious? Yes, sir. The gorilla. Congratulations. You win the book. If you could pass that back to him. Could I just see a show of hands how many other people saw the gorilla? Okay, so it looks like about 25% of you. But even those of you who saw the gorilla, there are a couple other things that you missed. Those of you who did not even see the gorilla, let me show you everything that you missed. And this is, in fact, the exact same video.
Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a flare, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
So I told you I was going to show you what a futurist does. Look, I gave all of you an incentive to focus on a very specific task. Count the basketballs, you're going to win the book. My guess is in your day-to-day job, you're similarly incented to focus like a laser on whatever your specific professional responsibility is. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's your job. But as a futurist, I have the luxury of stepping back and looking at the big picture. And the first thing I like to tell my audience is there is, in fact, the equivalent of an 800-pound gorilla coming front and center into our lives, beating its chest, only it is in the form of new emerging technologies. And I'm going to help you become aware of these new emerging technologies. Because of these new emerging technologies, we know that certain jobs, certain industries are going to disappear in the not too distant future. It's kind of like the person in the black shirt just walking away. But because of all of this technological transformation, we also know that business models and customer behavior is going to change in some subtle ways. It's like the curtain changing color. It is difficult to see all of this transformation. But the first thing we all need to do if we want to future-proof Kentucky is just become aware of how fast the world is changing right before our very eyes that we're just not seeing. And let me just walk you through the last couple of months. You probably saw some of these things, but you didn't really think about what they mean to the future of Kentucky. 2 weeks ago, how many of you saw that Volvo, now by 2019, in the next 2 years, all of their cars are either going to be hybrid or all electric. Is that going to impact Ford and Toyota? Yes. But it's also going to impact the state. You have 80,000 miles of road. My guess is most of them are funded by gas taxes. If the number of electric vehicles goes up, suddenly gas revenue goes down, and it becomes a transportation issue. As leaders, you need to be thinking about these issues today because they're going to be here sooner rather than later. A month ago, how many of you saw this news? Amazon bought Whole Foods, and the second after that news was announced, Amazon's stock spiked, but Kroger, Safeway, others plummeted. But I know in February of this year, Amazon just opened a new facility, $1.5 billion, 2,700 new jobs. As Amazon continues to grow, might Amazon continue to build out their facilities here in Kentucky? Absolutely. It's really exciting, but you need to be aware of how fast that expansion might take place. You might have missed this in May. A utility down in Arizona, where arguably it is sunnier, is now producing solar power for 3 pennies per kilowatt hour with no government subsidies. I don't know what the price of coal your electricity generated here is, but is it in the 3 cents per kilowatt hour? My guess is it's not. My point is solar energy without subsidies is in fact getting better, and we need to be aware of how some of these renewable energies are going to continue to transform our economy. In April, you might have missed this news, here's what they're building over in Germany.
So you have an airplane that takes us vertically like a helicopter. But once it's in the air, it accelerates into forward flight and flies uniformly.
It is an all-electric vehicle. It's already here today. Kentucky is number 2 in aerospace to the state of Washington. If you could get out in front of an advance like this, does that allow Kentucky the opportunity to become number 1 and surpass Washington? Absolutely. And I don't want to say for certain that that's going to be a technology that takes off, but you do need to be aware of it. Maybe you could start reaching out to those individuals over in Germany and say, look, if you're looking for somewhere to build it, come to Kentucky. And then in March of this year, how many of you saw this news that Tesla, which didn't even exist 10 years ago, has the same market cap of Ford and General Motors. Now, a lot of people might say that doesn't make any sense. They only produce 1% of the cars. That stock is going to plummet, and you might be right. But here's what people don't understand about Tesla. It's not just an automobile company. It is an energy company, it's a solar company, it's a battery company, and now it's even an insurance company. They're baking artificial intelligence into their cars. They're saying they're going to be so safe in the next 2 years that you're not going to have to buy automobile insurance because the car itself is going to make you safe. So now suddenly they're an insurance company as well. My point is the world is changing right before our very eyes, and we need to be aware of it. Now, the next thing I want to do in this presentation, I want to help you think a little bit like a futurist. And to do this, I always like this question. Who could tell me the mathematical relationship between these numbers? 1,000, million, billion, trillion, quadrillion? There's some mathematical relationship. Anyone know? Yeah, each one is 1,000 times larger than the next. The reason I tell you this is I need you to understand exponential growth. If something doubles, a technology doubles 10 times in the coming decade, it's not going to be 10 times as big through the power of exponential growth. It's going to be 1,000 times. We go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64, 128, 256, 512, 1,024. So if a technology doubles 10 times, we're going to see 1,000-fold increase. Certain technologies, we're going to go from the thousands to the millions, others from the millions to the billions. But each one is a quantitative leap ahead. Now, undoubtedly, some of you are saying, we're not going to see any 1,000-fold increase. You know what? Before I even talk to you about the future, let's just step back 19 years. I want to see how many of you can recognize this sound from 1998. How many of you can vaguely place that sound? Some of you can. Those of you who cannot, it's a 56K modem. All technologists have achieved in the last 19 years is a 1,400-fold improvement in bandwidth capacity. And we've gone from fixed landlines to today's mobile wireless world. You're all navigating that 1,000-fold increase relatively easily, and it should open your mind to the possibility that you're going to continue to live through some 1,000-fold increases. But this whole idea of mobility and bandwidth, this is trend number 1 that you need to be aware of, because we're just at the beginning of this revolution. We already have, especially in urban areas, we have 4G speeds. And so here's what this means. Down in St. Louis, this is North America's first virtual hospital. It's a real physical hospital, but by 2020, in the next 3 years, they hope to deliver telemedicine to 3 million people in parts of rural Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Kansas. The opportunity for the hospitals here in Louisville or Lexington to begin delivering telemedicine to people out in rural parts of Kentucky is a real possibility. And because this is not going to slow down. By 2020, and just in the next 3 years, we're going to go from 4G to 5G. And doesn't that sound like a nice incremental increase? Oh, we're just going from 4G to 5G. 5G is 100-fold more powerful. And this is going to transform the world in some powerful ways. Now, undoubtedly, some of you from rural parts of the state are saying, well, 4 and 5G, that's great for Louisville and other big cities, but Broadband is awful in our parts of the state. And it is today, but it doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. Here's what AT&T is now partnering with a local rural cooperative down in Georgia.
We found a way to send multi-gigabit speeds using infrastructure you see every day, power lines. It starts with low-cost plastic antennas and devices developed in our lab. When these devices are placed along the power lines, the signals travel around or near the lines, and not through them. These millimeter wave signals can enable ultra-fast connections nearly anywhere in a big city, rural town.
In big cities or rural towns. If I was part of Kentucky Wired, I'd be reaching out to AT&T and say, look, let's start a pilot program in some of our rural communities in Kentucky and let's see if it works. Let's help them get the broadband that they need for the future of education, the future of healthcare, the future of their communities. Now the second trend I need you to be aware of, we're going to potentially see a 1,000-fold increase. This is wearable technology. How many of you already wear a Fitbit? Could I just see a show of hands? So it looks like about 10–15% of you. So this is a wearable technology. It tracks your physical activity. You might use it to monitor your sleep, but it's only 3 years old. Has it ever occurred to you, what might the Fitbit 2.0 of the near future look like? Well, here's one idea. So personally, I don't know if that's cool, creepy, or a coming sign of the apocalypse, but here's the transition we're living through, and I don't think most people really appreciate it. The internet's only 8,000 days old, and when it was first developed, how did we access it? Through our desktop computers. Now we're accessing it through our smartphones. In the not too distant future, the internet and its information is going to come directly to us. It's going to be as though we are living in the internet. And this is a little hard to comprehend, but we see the early signs of it. I look around the room, and my guess is not too many of you are Pokemon Go players, but last year Pokemon Go popped up on the scene, and within the first week there were already more people playing this game than were on Twitter and Netflix combined. It was remarkable exponential growth. But you're thinking, well, Pokemon Go, that's just a silly game. What does that have to do with the future of Kentucky? Here's what it has to do with the future of Kentucky. Pokemon Go was the first widespread use of trend number 3, and that's augmented reality. The idea that we're going to start layering digital information on top of the physical world. Today, we're just using it to capture little Pokemon Go, but let me show you what's going to happen to the future of manufacturing here in Kentucky in a world of augmented reality. How the automotive workers, the aerospace engineers are going to be working in the near future is going to change as a result of augmented reality. But it's also going to transform education. And here's one just short little clip. So I'm not sure. I always had a hard time actually understanding physics and chemistry because I had to read it in a book. But if I could have actually seen a molecule and how they came together in augmented reality, I might have come to some new insights. My point is augmented reality is in fact going to transform education sooner rather than later. The fourth trend I need you to be aware of, this is 3D printing. This is the physical printing out of objects. Let me just show you where we were a couple of years ago.
3D print is kind of like magic. One minute you have this box on your desk, and the next minute you see an object appearing out of thin air.
So that's pretty cool, but that 3D printer in that video just 5 years ago cost $10,000, and it only printed cheap plastic objects. Today, that 3D printer is available for $199, and 3D printers are now printing things with 160 different materials. And Kentucky is actually a leader in this field. The University of Louisville 3 years ago was the first university ever to 3D print not a beating human heart, but a replica of a heart patient's heart. And so what that allowed the doctors to do is to practice on their exact heart before they actually went in and performed on the real thing. And because they were able to do that practice, they were able to perform the surgery 20% faster, saving the hospital thousands of dollars. And the patient was actually significantly safer. There were fewer post-op complications. But it's not stopping there. How many of you have heard of the Kentucky company called Advanced Solutions Incorporated? A few of you have. They are now 3D printing with a bio-ink liver tissue. But they've said within the next 5 to 10 years, they might be able to print skin, and then bones, and then kidneys, and then lungs, and then real human hearts. This is not science fiction. This is science fact, and Kentucky is a leader. But my point is this trend is going to grow exponentially more powerful. But let me tell you how this trend is going to affect some of your other industries. General Electric has said they're going to be printing aircraft engine parts within the next 3 years. What 3D printing means to the future of the aerospace industry is profound. And I know that they're already thinking about it today, but they might need some help from the state of Kentucky. Your neighboring state, Tennessee, now Oak Ridge, is actually 3D printed all of the exterior components of an automobile. So even the automobile industry is going to be transformed by 3D printing. We need to be aware of these trends because they're going to transform big industries sooner rather than later. The fifth trend I need you to be aware of is advances in nanotechnology. I'm not really going to get into any technical details here, but here's what you need to understand. Nano-enhanced materials 5 years ago were a $100 million a year industry, so peanuts in the global economy. In 5 years' time, it's going to be a $100 billion a year industry. From 100 million to 100 billion, that's a 1,000-fold increase. And let me just give you one nanomaterial that could revolutionize the world. This is called graphene. It's an absolutely amazing material. And here's just one thing it might allow us to do within the next 2 years. Because of graphene, you might be able to charge up an electric vehicle not in 4 hours, but in less than a minute, faster than you can refuel your existing automobile. It might not matter that gasoline stays at $2.20 a gallon if this technology takes off. But if it does take off, suddenly the number of electric vehicles increases even more. And then if you're a corn farmer here in Kentucky and you're supplying some of your corn to ethanol, and suddenly that market decreases, you might not think that you needed to know about nanotechnology, but it's going to be impacting everything from farmers to the automotive industry. We need to be aware of these trends. The sixth trend I need you to be aware of, another 1,000-fold increase. This is advances in robotics. You already have a huge UPS facility here, but they're already experimenting with drone deliveries. Amazon is working on the same thing. But here's how I want you to think about advances in robotic technology. Of course, there are already self-driven robotic cars, but in Nevada, there are self-driven trucks already on the road, and they're legal in Nevada. And then to show you how strange things are getting, I came across this photo recently. This is a self-driven truck delivering self-driven cars to Phoenix, Arizona. But my point is, this future is coming perhaps faster than we expect. And what is the most common job in North America? It's truck drivers. And I don't want to say for certain that all trucks are going to be self-driven in 10 years. But if they do take off, how do we retrain those workers? These are the types of things as leaders, we might want to dismiss them, but based on my understanding of technology and how fast these advances are coming, we at least have to take it seriously and we have to start thinking about it sooner rather than later. The seventh trend I need you to be aware of, another 1,000-fold increase. This is the Internet of Things. This is the idea that we're going to start putting tiny computer chips onto physical objects and connect those physical objects to the Internet. People are saying this is anywhere from a $7 to $15 trillion business opportunity. This is a little nebulous, so here's how I want you to understand the Internet of Things. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you might remember 8 years ago we had the tragic bridge collapse. We rebuilt the bridge in record time, but when we rebuilt it, we embedded it with 400 different sensors, and those sensors tell us traffic flow, stress, vibration, temperature, all sorts of different things. So it's a super smart bridge connected to the Internet. So that might beg the question, well, if that's a super smart bridge, what's a super dumb bridge? Well, here's a super dumb bridge, and we have hundreds of thousands of them all across the infrastructure of of North America. But that's a lighthearted example. But my guess is if you were in Atlanta 3 or 4 months ago when that bridge caught on fire, you would have wished that that bridge was smart. And in my research, I came across that Kentucky has 14,000 bridges, 3,000 of which are structurally deficient. And that definition of structurally deficient is pretty nebulous, but we need to think about upgrading our infrastructure sooner rather than later. And I think the states that do that, particularly those that are focused on transportation and logistics, are going to have a competitive advantage. But let me just show you some of the other things that we're connecting to the internet. I know that cattle is another big industry here in Kentucky. We're now connecting cows to the internet. And by virtue of doing this, the farmers who are doing it, they're increasing their milk production. They also know exactly when to inseminate those cattle. So by virtue of connecting their cattle and their animals to the internet, they're gaining a competitive advantage. Virtually every industry is going to start figuring out how to connect physical objects to the internet. The next trend I need you to be aware of, another 1,000-fold increase. This is gene sequencing technology. Here's how I want you to think about this technology. So 10 years ago, this fellow said, hey, I want to sequence my genome, I want to understand my health a little bit better. And that's exactly what he did 10 years ago. But 10 years ago, it cost him $100 million to sequence his genome. He was a billionaire, so he could afford it. But gene sequencing technology is getting better every 4 months. So the corollary is the price is cut in half every 4 months. And if you cut $100 million in half starting in July of 2007, something remarkable happens. By July of 2015, the price had already dropped to $10,000. By July of last year, it had dropped to $1,000. This July, $99. But hold on to your hats, folks. In the next 5 years, in 5 years, it's going to be more expensive for you to flush your toilet than it is to sequence your genes. Isn't that remarkable? What cost $100 million 10 years ago is going to be pennies in the future. And this is going to profoundly transform healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry. But what else might it mean? Well, we might be headed toward a future where life expectancies are significantly longer than our actuarial scientists are projecting today. And I don't mean to suggest that we'll all be living to 120, but what happens if we start living to 90 and 100? All of you who are involved in the pension systems, this is a really big issue, and we need to take it seriously. Because it's not just advances in genomics, it's going to be advances in biotechnology, nanotechnology, regenerative medicine. The possibility that we might be living a lot longer is real. And every leader in both the public and the private sector needs to be taking this seriously. And individually, if you're not prepared, if you're already 50, you should be prepared at least to live to 90, potentially 95. And so you need to start thinking about your retirement in a fundamentally different way as well. The next trend, yet another 1,000-fold increase. This is computer processing power and artificial intelligence. Here's how I want you to think about this. How many of you remember 4 years ago when IBM put its supercomputer on the game show Jeopardy? Any of you remember that? It crushed the human champion Ken Jennings. Well, in the last 4 years, all Watson has done is gotten 1,000 times more powerful. And it's gone from a game show to real-life applications. Let me just show you how some hospitals, or first, how many of you already have Amazon's Alexa in your house? Okay, so it looks like about 5–10% of you. So you already have an artificial intelligence platform in your house. And when it came out 18 months ago, it could do 100 different things. Today, because it's getting exponentially smarter, it can now do 12,000 different things. But now even hospitals have said, hey, we can start leveraging artificial intelligence to make our nurses 5 to 10% more productive.
Nurses today spend about 5 to 10% of their time just taking care of stuff that has nothing to do with care. Changing temperature, changing the lights, changing the TVs and channels. They ask them questions about the cafeteria, now we can automate the whole thing.
Healthcare costs are a real concern. But my point is we can leverage technologies that are already here today to become better, faster, more effective, and potentially lower healthcare costs regardless of what Washington does or doesn't do. But let me show you one other application, how artificial intelligence might transform education within the next 5 years.
Because in 5 years, classrooms themselves will learn about each student and personalize coursework accordingly.
Personalized education. Instead of having one teacher instruct 20 to 30 students exactly the same way, in the not too distant future, teachers using technology are going to be able to figure out how you learn differently than you and begin creating customized lessons that help all of our kids learn better, faster, and more effectively. A couple other trends where we're going to see thousand-fold increase. The amount of data we are collecting is skyrocketing. And we've all been hearing about big data for the last 7, 8 years, and it is a trend. But I want you to think of all of the data we have on ourselves and our businesses as just that tip of the iceberg. We're going to collect a lot more in the future. And this is going to change business in some profound ways. I think the winners of the future are going to be those that understand they're in the data business. Let me give you the best example. It is Amazon. You already saw that 15% of your peers already have Amazon Echo in their house. But every time you interact with that, Amazon's collecting a little more data on you. And here's what they want to do with all that data, and they've said it publicly on 60 Minutes.
Anything you want on Earth, you're going to get from us. Anything you want on Earth, you're going to get from us. That's where we're headed.
Anything. That's a pretty big umbrella, folks. They don't just say books or consumer items, anything. And they're now collecting so much data on their customers that you know what their end goal is? It's to know what you want to buy before you even know what you want to buy. And you might think that's out there, but a couple of years ago they filed a patent for predictive shipping. And over this past holiday season, they were strategically placing objects in communities like Louisville in anticipation of the idea that someone on your block was going to buy an item so that they could deliver it to them as quickly as possible. The world is changing before our very eyes, and we need to be aware of it. And if you don't think it's changing before our very eyes, I was watching the Super Bowl a couple months ago, and I saw this 10-second spot during the third quarter. I want to prepare you. It's gross, but it makes a powerful point here. So there in one 10-second spot is artificial intelligence, and how do they envision delivering the Doritos to you in the future? Via drones. The signs are right in front of our eyes, and we need to start paying attention. But I told you the title of this presentation was The Big Aha, and I said the H stands for humility. And here's what I mean. In a world that's changing as fast as ours, we all need humility to the idea that what served us well yesterday might not be sufficient moving forward. I'm going to give you a little test metaphor for humility. What I want you to do is I want you to turn to your neighbor and answer for your neighbor this very simple question. In your Kentucky town or county, what color is the yield sign? Tell the person next to you what 2 colors the yield sign is. Okay, I have heard the answer. So how many people said yellow or yellow and black? If you did, congratulations. That was the correct answer up until 1971. The yield sign has been red and white since Richard Nixon was in the White House. Now, I know some of you go, no way, that's not true. Yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. The first yield sign you see after leaving the Galt House is going to be red and white, and curiously enough, every other one all the way home going to be red and white. Inevitably, I know that 1 or 2 of you are going to want to pigeonhole me at the break and go, well, in my rural area of Kentucky, they're still yellow. No, they're not. They're not yellow anywhere in North America, and they haven't been for decades. But to me, this is a great metaphor for humility. Look, it is a fact that years ago, when many of us were first learning to drive, yield signs were yellow and black. The problem is that old, crappy information has just stayed stuck in our head. Even in the face of overwhelming visual evidence to the contrary, we've been zipping by these red and white signs for decades, and it hasn't processed. My message to you is this. Look, there are certain things you learned about your job, your industry, your community, Kentucky, your customers, your business model. Yes, they were all true yesterday. It doesn't mean that they're still true today. We all need humility to the idea that not everything that sits up here is still necessarily true. Now, those of you who said yellow or yellow and black, I'm not done with you yet. If you're a little curious as to what your brain looks like, here's what your brain kind of looks like. So, so that's a lighthearted example. But now let me give you another example, and it just speaks to how fast the world is changing. If I was here 5 years ago at the 7th anniversary of the summit, and I said to you, what color are most taxis in most major American cities? What would you have said 5 years ago? Yeah, like, well, they're yellow. But of course, is that true anymore? No. How many of you have already used Uber? Could I just see a show of hands? How many of you know what Uber is? Yeah, virtually everyone. Uber could not have existed as a company 10 years ago. GPS, mobile, cloud technology all existed 10 years ago, but they had not yet scaled and converged to a point where a company could create a platform to do what? What does Uber and Lyft really do? Well, they allow strangers to give strangers rides safely. And it's the basis of a $70 billion company. And it's decimating the taxi industry, but it's also transforming the automotive industry. Many young people, especially in urban areas like Louisville and Cincinnati, are now saying, you know what? I don't need to own a car. I only use an automobile a couple of times a week, so why should I spend $15,000 or $20,000 on a car and then insure it and have to deal with parking? It's all just a hassle. I'm just going to access a car the couple of times a week I need it. So they're trading ownership for access. And this is another really big trend you need to be aware of. Some people call it collaborative consumption. Other people call it the sharing economy. The point is, in a world of sensors and smartphones and GPS, we're going to start figuring out how to share a lot of different things. And to make this real, let me just want you to soak your mind around this little factoid. How many of you have a drill in your home utility closet, basement? Virtually everyone does, but unless you're a real hobbyist, you don't really, the average drill user uses it 13 minutes their entire life. So the question then becomes, does everyone on your city block, in your small community, in your apartment building need to own their own drill? No, they don't. They just need to access the drill the 13 minutes in their lifetime that they need that drill. But they're not just going to do it with drills. They're going to do it with lawnmowers, snow blowers, boats, all sorts of things. Younger people especially are growing up in a different world than you and I did, and they're figuring out how to share things. But this is going to affect the logistics industry. So instead, if lots of people aren't buying lawnmowers and drills, there's going to be a reduced demand for trucking and shipping and logistics. You might not think this trend is real, but it's growing, and you need to be aware of it because it could affect our industry or your industry in some powerful ways. Let me just give you a couple of other metaphors for humility. I like this next visual metaphor. Often when we're introduced to new technologies, we like to think, oh, I get how that's going to transform my business. But I think we should all have a little more humility. You're all going to recognize the technology in this clip. It's 30 years old, but it's the desktop computer. Let's see how she dealt with this 30 years ago when it was introduced. So, I showed that to my kids a while back, and they're like, well, that's just dumb, Dad. They had no idea what a manual typewriter was, so the whole dang joke was lost on them. But my point is, it's easy to laugh at this now, but I think a lot of us look at 3D printers or robots or the Internet of Things and go, that's not going to affect me, my industry. You might be right, but maybe, just maybe, because you didn't grow up with these technologies, you might not be the first one to appreciate how they're going to transform your world. And let me put this in a modern context with a trend I haven't talked about yet, and that is virtual reality. Could I just see how many people have actually tried virtual reality? So it looks like about 25% of you have. So these are wearable technology. You put them on, and it feels as though you are wherever the goggles are showing you to be. Those of you who have not yet experienced virtual reality, let me try and give you a sense of what it's like. This grandmother is watching Jurassic Park, so she feels as though she's in a park with dinosaurs. Let's see how it feels. So apparently it's pretty good. But I know a lot of you are looking at that and going, no way. I'm not going to be caught dead wearing that. That's ridiculous. And you know what? You might not, but let me just show you how it could transform education in some powerful ways. And this is a university in Idaho is already doing this to train nurses.
Nursing professors at BFU say right now students only get to practice certain methods only a handful of times under faculty oversight. But using this new technology, they can do those delicate procedures over and over again all on their own.
We want them to develop that muscle memory system to deliberately practice things before they go out.
From sterilizing their environment to completing complex medical procedures, the simulation scores them on how well they complete a series.
It's a really powerful technology that could transform education in some really significant ways. But if you just think it's ridiculous, you might dismiss it and miss out on an opportunity to train the next generation of Kentucky nurses, doctors, auto mechanics, plane mechanics. We're going to be using this technology to train a lot of very sophisticated professionals in the not too distant future. Let me give you a couple other metaphors for humility. We're now celebrating the 10th anniversary of the iPhone. And this was Steve Ballmer. He was then CEO of Microsoft. This was his reaction to the iPhone 10 years ago. Doesn't have a keyboard. Could I just see how many of you have an iPhone on your possession? Could you just raise your hand? Yeah, Steve Ballmer was wrong. He could have benefited from a little humility. He didn't know what he didn't know. And my point with this clip is not to poke fun at Steve Ballmer. He's a bright individual. My point is, in the coming years, you're going to be introduced to some technologies and you're going to go, no way, no chance. That is not going to work here in Kentucky. And I have nothing to worry about in my business. What I'm trying to ask is all of you to have a little humility. And let me just give you one radical idea, and I know that a lot of you are going to cringe at it, but it's a real technology. And how many of you have started to read about the advances in artificial meat? Yeah, it sounds like a bad idea. It doesn't sound very tasty, but Tyson, North America's largest meat producer, just invested 5% in a company. And Beyond Meat is now in 600 grocery stores in North America, and it is on the meat shelf. Now you might be saying, no chance. Our cattle industry, our poultry industry have nothing to worry about with this technology. You might be right, but maybe, just maybe, we should have some humility. You and I might not like artificial meat, but vegans might, people who care about the carbon footprint of the meat industry, or who knows why they will eat it, but we have to have some humility. One other act that requires a little humility, but I think will really position Kentucky and yourself well for the future, is this. Get a reverse mentor. I look around the room, many of you are my peers, and hopefully you're all mentoring younger people in your communities and in your jobs, and you should continue to do that. But in a world that's moving as fast as ours, those of us who are a little bit older should pivot 180 degrees and get reverse mentors. People who are younger than us, who have less experience. Why? Because they see the world from a different perspective. I'm going to give you a little test as to whether you'd benefit from a reverse mentor. This was on an entrance exam to a kindergarten. I did not know kindergartens had entrance exams, but apparently some do. And the 5-year-olds had 20 seconds to determine what parking spot number that car was in. Since you're all a little older, I'm only going to give you 15 seconds, but see if you can figure it out. And if you know the answer, keep it to yourself. What parking spot number is that car in? Okay, in the interest of time, how many people are confident of their answer? And typically about 10% are, and someone tell me what the answer is. 87, that's right. And what did it require you to do? You had to see the problem from a different perspective. Now, all the 5-year-olds, they were able to figure it out. They all got into the kindergarten. Well, my point is, this is all reverse mentors do. You and I have gotten so locked into seeing our job or industry from one perspective that sometimes we just need someone younger to come in and see these technologies, these trends from a different perspective. And they might give us insights as to how our customers are changing and what new opportunities some of these tools and technologies might present us. I'm now going to begin wrapping up and move into the final A, but to do this, I'm going to ask everyone to stand up. I'm going to see how close all of you are paying attention to me. What I want you to do is I want you to watch me as closely as possible and do exactly as I do. If you have arthritis of the hands, you are exempt from this exercise, but if you don't, I'd like you to participate. So everyone watch me as closely as possible, do exactly as I do. Everyone put your hands up, put your hands out a little bit, wiggle the fingers, clap your hands together. Flip your hands over, okay? Now take your right hand and put it over your left. Everyone, this is your right hand, even here in Kentucky. Okay, good. Now lock those fingers together. So they should be locked. Okay? Now lower your hands. Tap those index fingers together. So do you promise you are all watching? Because if you were all watching, everyone in this room should be able to quickly, simply, and elegantly, without moving your shoulders, rotate those fingers 180 degrees to the top like a pistol. Thumbs up here. I see a few, you can't switch your hands after the fact, but I see a few of you who can do it, but are most of you somehow suspiciously locked up and you'd have to go all the way over? All right, have a seat. I'm going to show you what just happened, but if you did end up locked up, I want you to acknowledge clearly I did something of which you were not aware, and you should have some humility to the idea that even though you were watching me closely, you missed something. I'm not going to show you the trick, and I'm going to tell you why I show it to you. First, I know if I don't show you the trick, half of you are going to be under the table like, how did that guy do that? Dang him. So here's the trick, and you can go back and do it with your colleagues, your peers, your kids. Say, watch me as closely as possible, do exactly as I do. Put your hands up, put your hands out, clap your hands together, flip your hands over, put your right hand over your left. Everyone does that right, but you might remember I then acted as though someone here in Kentucky did it wrong, and I said, no, 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 your right hand. And I moved my right hand out that way. Virtually all of you tracked it with your eyes. As you were tracking it with your eyes, I used that deception to twist my other hand that way, which allows me to do that. But if you don't see it, you end up locked up. So why do I go to all the trouble of showing you this trick? Here's why. Here's the one thing I know for certain as a futurist, and it's this. It's after I leave here today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, our world is going to change again. But if you don't pick up on these changes, what's going to happen to you, your job, and the future of Kentucky? You might end up locked up, inflexible, and behind the change. But if you do pick up on these changes, you're going to be flexible, adaptable enough to steer Kentucky into the future. So that's a long way to go to the final A of the big aha, and that is action. There are a lot of actions I could encourage you to take, but I'm going to emphasize one today, and it is to regularly take time to think about the future. I actually advocate leaders take an entire week every year just to think about the future. I can already hear what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, who do you think you are to tell me I have to take a week to think? Don't you understand how busy I am? I do understand how busy all of you are. But if you're saying you don't have a week to think about the future in a world that's changing as fast as ours, you're saying you don't have 2% of your time.